was bound to come to this. You commit to a series on the Ten Commandments and you're going to end up with the one about adultery sooner or later. So, I thought probably I'd be okay as long as there wasn't a children's choir singing Me and Mrs. Jones. We got close, but I'm still okay. This is one of those commandments that is based on something that we say we don't really believe anymore, yet it also seems sensible still. Here's the part that we don't believe anymore. It used to be in the time when the commandment was either handed down from Mount Sinai or copied from the Babylonian Code of Hammurabi. It doesn't really matter. A woman in those times was property. She was the property of her father until she got married, and then she was the property of her husband, like his cow and his goat and his pigs and, well, not pigs in the Jewish community, but like a farm animal. And the reason for getting married was procreation. So since, I don't know if you remember, last week we talked about Sheol, which is this place where you go and you follow your descendants, the doings of your family. That and the fact that you took your whole family's wealth and passed it down to your firstborn son, both of those things made you want to know for sure that the babies that your wife was having were yours, were made of your blood. So women were pretty much on lockdown in their childhood years, in their teenage years, in their married years. The people they were bearing children for needed to know that they were going to be passing their wealth on to people of their own blood, and that they were going to be able to have somebody to watch after they died, because if the descendants weren't theirs, then they would have nothing to do after they died. Punishment for sex outside of marriage, therefore, was severe. If a girl was found not to be pure, I don't know if we still have children in here, but I'm going to speak obliquely, then, well, as obliquely as I can about the Jewish scriptures. I remember one time teaching a speed course to the religious education teachers. I said, we're going to go through the Hebrew scriptures, we're going to tell this story and then this story, and I talked to them about Abraham and Isaac and, Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, on up, Lot, Moses. Somewhere during the Abraham sacrificing Isaac story, one of them raised her hand. She said she was from Portland. She said, excuse me, you want us to tell these stories to the children? So in the first 5 books, called in the Jewish tradition, the books of Moses, the Torah, the laws are laid down like this. If a young woman is not pure when she marries, she's dragged back to her father's house and stoned to death by the men of the village. This still happens in parts of the world. If the woman is taken by force, the man who took her by force, his punishment is to marry her. Can you imagine? They are forced to marry. Having sex with your neighbor's wife was an offense against your neighbor, a violation of his property rights. Married men could use professional women, working girls. That was fine. That was not adultery. A man could marry more than one woman. King David famously was married to several women. His son Solomon was married to thousands and had concubines. Romantic love was not what it was about for most people, and still isn't for many people on this planet. Romantic love is an idea that started maybe in the Renaissance. I haven't done a sermon about romantic love. I'll have to. I'm sure many of you know, and you'll tell me in the line on the way out. The idea of actually marrying for love rather than marrying to join two kingdoms or join two properties or have someone to take care of you. The idea of marrying because you felt love and attraction for someone is pretty new. So this property idea it lingers on. I mean, I've done so many weddings where the father gives the daughter away. This is a lovely idea. I have nothing against it because it's nice to have a representative of one family bless the new family. But it's a remnant of a time when the woman belonged to the man and he takes her up the aisle and hands her off to the new man, who's then going to take care of her. Rabbi Jesus didn't talk too much about adultery. There were two places. He says, I tell you that someone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. Those of you who are old enough to remember, a president named Jimmy Carter remembered that he famously confessed to having lust in his heart. I'm sure that was a tense dinner time with Rosalind after that. Then he says, I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife except for unfaithfulness causes her to become an adulteress. And anyone who marries the divorced woman commits adultery. That's what they say he said. You can't ever say Rabbi Jesus said this because all we have is what they say he said, and many people had a vested interest in having him say certain things. So anyway, those are the two things that they say he said, and then here's the story of what they say he did. There was a woman brought to him who had been taken in adultery. And they threw her down in front of him, and they said, Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say? They were trying to trap him. But in the Middle East, you never answer a question straight. You always answer it with a story or with another question, because this is smart. But he didn't answer at all. He just started drawing in the dirt, holding everybody's attention, because what's he drawing? Maybe he's writing his answer out. So everybody got quiet and just kind of watched him. And then they pestered him some more when they realized he wasn't going to answer. And then he said, if any one of you is without sin, let him be the first to throw a stone at her. So gradually the crowd kind of melted away. And it was just Rabbi Jesus and the woman. And he said to her, Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you? No one, she said. Then neither do I condemn you, he said. Go now and leave your life of sin. So, was Jesus soft on adultery or not? He said a couple things. He did that one thing, they say. We don't know. But still today, there are many preachers who won't marry you if you've been divorced because of this thing that they say he said in Matthew 5, that if you're divorced, you're an adulterer. And if you marry a divorced woman, then you commit adultery. I used to talk to this woman. I was a marriage counselor for about 15 years. And she had been in an abusive relationship, and her pastor had counseled her that she needed to leave this man, that she needed to divorce him, which is kind of unusual. So she did, and then some years later, she met another guy, fell in love, and asked this pastor to marry her, and he said, "I can't marry you, you're divorced." I think mostly what Rabbi Jesus seemed to try to do was to get people to look at themselves and their self-righteousness, to try to get the sinners to do better and the righteous folks to be nicer. You know that poem that ends, and dear God, I have this one prayer, please make the bad people good and make the good people nice. So, what does this commandment have to say to people who don't see a woman as property? Once that little bit is cleared up, so we have a portion of the planet that does not view a woman as property, what then does this whole commandment have to say? So, our culture says that you are going to fall in love and partner up or marry somebody. Our culture now has room for that person to be of your same sex or of a different gender in many places. So you're going to fall in love and you're going to love that person forever. And if you don't love the person forever, then it wasn't really love. Psh. There's no place wise that says that, but everybody feels that. That somehow if the love ends in a relationship, that it was all a lie. There's no idea that it could be really good for a while, and then it ends. And that whoever knows that it has ended first has to say something. Anyway, people are expected in the culture to be faithful to their partners, and according to the studies, about half of us are, and half of us aren't. Most Americans, including Unitarian Universalists, expect faithfulness of themselves and their partners as well. But for some, there are other arrangements that people make for marriage and partnership because once you're in the privacy of your own relationship, you can talk and arrange whatever you would like to arrange. Some people have quote-unquote open marriages where both are allowed to have relationships outside the marriage with the promise that there'll be no deceit or lying about it. They say it's the lying that adulterates, changes, or destroys the relationship. I don't see how that could work, but some people, I guess it works for. The folks who name themselves polyamorous make committed relationships with more than one person at the same time. Just read in the New Yorker, most of you get that magazine, that the guy who invented Wonder Woman was in a polyamorous three-person relationship that lasted until he died. So apparently they found a way to work it out. Maybe Wonder Woman helped. What is important ethically is that couples agree on what the situation is. It's like one person can't be in an open relationship when the other one doesn't know that. That's the no fair part. It's not this commandment that keeps most religious liberals faithful to their partners or to the agreement with their partners. It's the idea of the damage that would be done to the trust that underlies your intimacy. So you have intimacy, you have trust, you have vulnerability with another person. That helps growth take place, that enriches your life. And if there is adultery in the relationship, that damages the trust upon which this intimacy is based, and you can't really have intimacy, which is a plus for some people, because they don't really want intimacy. So they'll do whatever they can to mess it up. And cheating can be one of those things that you use to mess up the intimacy, because intimacy itself is too scary, and vulnerability is not going to happen. There's a Yiddish proverb I love that says, "You can't ride two horses with one butt." We talk about ethical sexuality with our kids in the program called Our Whole Lives, or OWL, OWL. We talk to them about how to be ethical sexually. Okay, here's what I think. I think there are a lot of promises in a relationship that can be broken. I think there are a lot of ways to adulterate the chemical mix of intimacy, vulnerability, and commitment that are the basis of a strong relationship. For some couples, the job is adultery. One of the people is so committed to their work that all of their energy and charm and goodwill are being spent, and they come home with nothing. They drag themselves onto the couch and just go, ugh. And they need to just wall themselves off for the rest of the night so that they can become rested enough to have more energy, charm, and goodwill for the next day at work. So the partner doesn't really get that. For some people, pornography is the adultery. One of you is spending more time with the dream of sex than with actual sex, comparing the actual sex to the dream of sex, then everything the partner could have expected in terms of energy and effort and will and engagement is going somewhere else. For some couples, the energy is all flowing toward the family of origin. Your brother's got problems. Your mom is sick. The family of origin is taking all the energy. And there are times in all of our lives when that is going to happen. That's just a life stage where you're pouring energy into your babies, you're pouring energy into your parents who are in the final stages of their life. But for some people, it is a constant. I don't know how many of y'all watched The Roosevelts. I'm sure most of you did. But the mother-in-law was a force in the Roosevelts' marriage between Eleanor and Franklin. Franklin's mother bought their houses, decorated their houses, took care of Franklin when he was sick. And in our day and time, most people would look at that and say, "Back off, lady." But nobody was going to say that to her. For some people, all their partner's energy goes to an addiction and takes them away from the relationship. Or they adulterate the relationship with the substance. Because I don't know if you know, but almost every substance has its own personality. Alcohol, for example, is self-hating and bitter, usually, and that is often projected outward on the partner. So you're not really having a relationship just with your partner. You're having a relationship with your partner plus alcohol, or your partner plus cocaine, or your partner plus whatever. There's emotional abandonment in a relationship. I knew one couple where the man had a younger woman friend, and they were just friends, but he adored her, and the wife liked her too. But it felt scary, like a lot of his energy was going toward his friend and not toward his wife. And I don't know if his wife would have gotten that energy anyway if the friend hadn't been there. I know some couples who sexually abandon each other, and they just decide, you know what, I don't really want to do this anymore, but you better be faithful to me. I'm not going to give you what you need, but I will be very upset if you're unfaithful. Now, the old rabbis wrote about this. They said if you make a covenant with a partner, if you have a marriage covenant, a partner covenant with someone, then you have to come through with sex now and then. For rabbis, it's once a week. For people who are traveling salespeople, so you're out on the camel, on the desert, on the Silk Road, or whatever, and sailors, you have to come home once every 6 months. So no sex was high on the list of things that killed your covenant, according to the old rabbis. I think there are lots of ways to avoid showing up for your relationship. And I think there are lots of ways to shred a covenant that's been made between two people. And I think couples should talk about expectations of one another, about what arrangement they want for their relationship, and they should not assume that there's only one way to go about things. And if you make a covenant with a partner, try to keep it. And if the covenant is broken, try to be engaged in renegotiating it so that it is authentic again. And if you can't, you can't. And Yom Kippur is coming up next week when you can say, I made a vow and I cannot keep it. Please release me from my vow. Because this happens. There is a lot that is not controllable about relationships. If you would rather be alone than in a relationship, it's time to end it. If you'd rather be with someone else, it's time to know that probably the same stuff's going to come up in this next relationship that was in your last one. If you're in a relationship that you wouldn't want your children to be in, as adults, you should model for your children what you would want them to do. Hear me? A lot of people stay together for the children because it's okay for them to suffer, but they wouldn't want their children to suffer. If you wouldn't want your children to do what you are now doing, then do something different. What matters is being loving to those you're with as well as to yourself. The UU's stance towards sex is that it is healthy, healing, sacred, to be celebrated, but that its destructive side is equally powerful. The abuses of sex are hurtful. Several of my clergy colleagues have been removed from ministerial fellowship because of unethical sexual behavior within their congregations. This is not okay. It is not okay to behave sexually with children. I was one of the signers of the Interfaith Religious Declaration on Sexual Morality, Justice, and Healing. How's that for a title? And part of it says, our culture needs a sexual ethic focused on personal relationships and social justice, rather than on particular sexual acts. All persons have the right and responsibility to lead sexual lives that express love, justice, mutuality, commitment, consent, and pleasure. Grounded in respect for the body and for the vulnerability that intimacy brings, this ethic fosters physical, emotional, and spiritual health. It accepts no double standards and applies to all persons without regard to sex, gender, color, age, bodily condition, marital status, or sexual orientation, and add to that list as you want. And what I want to end by saying is we are fragile beings, my friends. We make terrible mistakes, and sometimes what looks like a mistake wasn't. And sometimes what looks like the right thing wasn't. And it's as hard to figure out the moral of the story sometimes as it is to figure out what the moral of World War I was. Sometimes adultery is carelessness, and sometimes it's communication. Let's love one another the best way we can. I am going to skip the second hymn because we went long. but it was totally worth it.